This is the session on business analysis, or what we're calling business analysis analytics within the PMO, within the project planning process. And my name is Charles Van Dyke. I'm with Oracle. And I have colleagues to my left here who will be part of Q&A and co-presenting. Padmini Kanive, who is with me on a team of applied technology folks who focus on project portfolio management and the application of technology like analytics in that space. And Keith Metzger, who's a colleague of mine in the consulting world who work with project portfolio planning tools. Collectively, we've got a tremendous amount of experience in the space over the last number of years. I know I personally spent a lot of time with the state of California over a number of years, not recently, but within my recent past, and as well as work nationally with a number of different accounts all across the country. I wanted to just open up real quick with a couple of polling questions that we'd like to ask to kick things off. And one of them, just a show of hands really, just to understand if anybody is familiar with business analytics and how it might be used in the PMO or the project planning world. Yes, no, some?
One.
Okay.
Two.
I mean, everybody knows the transactional side, which is the Gantt schedule, which is some of the reports that you might get out of the day-to-day running of a specific project. But analytics is a topic that transcends single project in many cases. But we'll get into that in a little bit. Secondly, a couple of things we wanted to bring your attention about analytics is something like geospatial, the use of geospatial within reporting or analytics. Okay, a little bit? One or two? That's how I interpret it a little bit. Okay. Have any of you been involved with data warehouse building projects over the years? Okay, a little bit there as well.
Our department has a BW business warehouse.
Okay, okay. And you know, a lot of the terms around data warehousing and business intelligence and analysis are becoming more ubiquitous in the workplace. And lastly, one of the items we see a lot is just simple reports. Using reports. I think everybody uses reports, and they could be a real pain in the butt. Honestly, I mean, you're always 80% there. But it's the 20% that your customer wants or that you personally want to see out of a report that somebody gives to you. So, that's just kind of a throw in there for you. Now, what we wanted to do in this session was to just sort of take a look at analytics and how we apply it. I mean, we're a product vendor. We have analytic products. We have PPM products. And I think for the most part, we'll talk ubiquitously about the industry and what you might want to expect from a robust project portfolio management solution and how that might be applied in your environment. And that's kind of what we wanted to drive here. But I'll state the obvious. I mean, we have a bent toward our own products. That's what we can highlight. But it is a very ubiquitous discussion, I think, in general. So these are the three goals that we're wanting to get across. Okay. Now, just to start things off, just a couple of facts that I'm sure, a lot of you can certainly appreciate. One of which is this one, where if we look at the explosion of data that has happened in the world, 90% of it is in the last couple of years. And it was kind of funny. I was looking at this slide and I'm thinking about, well, that's probably prior to the NSA building out their data center on, data collection. So I'm wondering if it isn't more like, 400%. Secondly, that data volume is growing, and it's growing continuously. And what I think a lot of organizations need to understand is that, you need a way to be able to connect and make relationships with this data, correlate this data, so that it becomes relevant. Otherwise, it's just data. It reminds me of a scene, and I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Matrix. I personally love that movie. I think it's hilarious. It's a very great explanation for why we're here. But that's just me. But when you see the numbers and symbols spilling across the screen when they're talking about the matrix, one of the things that I think about when I look at that is that's what data in a spreadsheet looks like to a lot of people. It's just a bunch of numbers spilling down columns, but it doesn't actually ring true and bring to light what kind of a message you're trying to tell. So that's my little personal analogy on that one. So I just thought we have an hour 50. We're breaking this up into a couple of parts. I don't have a problem. Anybody, if you have a question you want to ask, put your hand up and ask a question. We're going to have some logical points where it makes sense to perhaps have some discussion about this. But we were going to think about just describing business intelligence just from an overview. I mean, what are some of the parts? What's the terminology? And what this means. It might help some of you understand the context for this. And Padmini is going to be doing that part. And then I'll take a look at some very relevant customer examples, what I call business intelligence in action. So you'll see precisely how other organizations are looking at the way they view projects and the way they illustrate information to their customers. And then we'll of course, go through a few other items. Okay. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Padmini and.
It's still you.
Pardon?
I believe it's still you.
Is it still me?
Yeah.
My bad.
Surprise.
I guess I have a couple more slides. Sorry, we were mucking around with the order just before we got in here. That's what happens. Okay, so a couple of quick points. From the perspective of analytics, like I said earlier, when you're dealing with a tremendous amount of information, you are thinking about ways in which you can visualize this information, ways you can structure this information, ways you can relate this information. In a PPM, the core areas that kind of come to mind are schedule. How do these activities and tasks and WBS elements relate to one another from the perspective of running an active project and delivery? The resources, and this one is very near and dear to my heart, and that is about how you are applying the right people at the right time, at the right situation. It's an incredibly tough thing for most organizations to handle. And cost, being able to understand how costs relate to the way that you manage P&L on a project, if that's important. I know in the public sector, P&L isn't as big a deal. You want to track the money. It's just not from a profit and loss perspective. It might be the color of money. It might be tracking the funds that are supporting the project. So it's a different perspective, but it's still more or less the same thing. So a lot of this information comes at you each and every single day in a tremendous fashion. Like I said, from the matrix example, you see all this data spilling down a screen and you're trying to figure out what it all means. And, changes happen on a daily basis, a weekly basis, monthly close-end basis. And, you need ways to slice and dice and understand the reality you're dealing with, or perhaps the reality you're facing if you don't deal with the reality you have today, okay? And ultimately, it provides a high value to you as an organization to be able to predict or try to at least understand the trends that are leading you in the direction you're heading. So there's a couple of different roles that are typically involved in different, what I might call stratified levels of information that needs to be presented. There are perspectives from the folks on the ground that are at a day-to-day level dealing with changes and more downstream. And there's different information that they need to see and understand. From the technology perspective or the IT perspective, looking at a variety of different bits of information that relate and correlate to make up the reality you're trying to show, the information as it's being put together. How do you do it? What's an easy way to do this? How do I wrap my hands around the ability to easily build or provide this information to my constituents? And then from the high level, you're thinking about, okay, so I can collect a lot of this information. I can build dashboards. I can illustrate what I need to illustrate in more of a data-driven fashion. But how do I want to present that information to the executive level or the department heads or perhaps the legislature, And in many cases, what you present there, may have a very specific flavor. I remember a couple of projects I've dealt with in the state of California where we're looking at, various oversight in some of the larger capital projects, and there's specific types of information you want to surface, but there's other information you want to hold back. So you want a way to present precisely what you need to present, but nothing more, nothing less in many of the cases, okay? And just simply the fact that there's a lot of different types of consumers of information, okay? All right. Any questions, comments, experiences? Everybody still lunched out?
The, this analytics that you're talking about, Excel was the go-to for so long, and you get your charts and, create it any way you want it. We just ran out of room.
Yeah.
The data set is so big now that Excel is not able to do what we used to expect out of it. I think that's where the analytics is coming in, because
Yeah.
we needed a tool, and somebody was smart enough to develop this.
Mm-hmm. I think the largest, that's an excellent point. I tell you something, for analyzing, things, Excel is phenomenal. It's amazing. Even how it's evolved over the years. But, the largest Excel spreadsheet I think I've ever seen was about 100 meg. And, if you turned on the formulas and you moved a cell or changed a value, it might go on vacation for about 5 minutes to come back because of all the links. And you're absolutely right. I think so many organizations do use tools like that, and it's great, but you inevitably outgrow it, and it doesn't take long. And the other fact is that, it's your tool. You built it, you know how to use it, but, if somebody gives you an Excel spreadsheet and says, yeah, you can do great resource planning with this, and you look at it and going, I don't know what any of this stuff means. Yeah, you know where everything's linked, but if I change this, what does it mean? And so definitely having a database that can structure a lot of this stuff is really the only way you can scale,
One big component to add to that, because that's totally true about how Excel is where lots of people are using this in the past, and still are today, is it's harder to have time-based information in Excel. So to see where trends are going, to see projections of where things are happening, get a little more challenging in Excel. The security around it, who changed it, where did the data come from, that's harder to do with Excel. It's a very open platform. So when you start to have analytics where you know exactly where the data came from, you're using multiple data streams and sources into one place, and you have a full history, that full data warehouse of information that they're viewing, that's where you start to get even more power to your capability in decision making.
All right. Okay, I think I'm on cue now to hand it over.
Awesome.
Awesome.
How does this
There you
work?
go. Forward, backward.
Okay, that's pretty easy. All right. So to keep the afternoon really interesting, I'm going to talk about some terminology. So when we're talking about, business analytics, business intelligence, data warehousing, et cetera, there's a lot of different definitions that come into mind, and probably each one of our definitions is a little bit different than the one next to us. So we just wanted to kind of do a little bit of level setting as to just a high level understanding of what each of these terms really means. First one, what is business intelligence? From Wikipedia here, business intelligence is a set of theories, methodologies, architectures, and technologies that transform raw data into meaningful and useful information for business purposes. Really, what does that all come down to? We have tons and tons of data, and it's growing on a daily basis. Business intelligence essentially lets you interpret that data and make sense of it. So that's bottom line of what BI comes to. Some of the terminologies we hear in business intelligence or analytics, data warehousing, et cetera, here's a little subset of the ones that are probably most commonly heard of. And I just wanted to walk through and kind of talk about each one of those as to how it relates to business intelligence, what are the different pieces, and then we're going to talk about solutions and things like that moving forward. First term. We probably already heard this a few times already in the last 10 minutes. Data. What is data? Data really is just information. From I like to use Amazon as an example because I'm assuming most people here have used Amazon to purchase things, look for things, etc. Every single piece of information in Amazon or on their website is a data. When we log into, when we create an account for an email, we put in our name, our last name, what we want our email address to be like called, etc. All pieces of data. In the project management world, when you want to create a new project, you give it a project name, you give it a start date, an end date. Each of those pieces of information is considered data. So imagine when you have a very large project, how much data actually goes into the system. And that's just not even really like expanding to how you look at the data. It's just stuff that gets put into the database, right? And somebody in the previous session this morning talked about kind of understanding how the data is stored in the database and all of that. So data really, bottom line, is information. We go to metadata. Takes it a little bit more into what does metadata mean? Metadata is really data about data. So information about your data. So me as an individual, you know, when I put in, if somebody had to describe me, what would it be? You know, I have black hair, brown eyes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all metadata about me. When we're talking about Amazon again, you're looking for a book. Metadata might be things like the title of the book, the author of the book, the ISDN number of the book, et cetera. So it kind of has all those different pieces. So every data element has metadata associated to it. So in the project world, you know, things might be, so you enter in a project name. That name has 8 characters in it. That name has X number of alphanumeric alphabets and numeric characters as well, et cetera. So like all those characteristics that make up one piece of element. So now you can just imagine the data expanding in the database, because it's not just the data point, it's now also information about the data. And how do you make sense of all of that? That all kind of comes into play when we want to put information together and actually get some information out of it. ETL. I like this picture a lot. Essentially what that comes down to, we always hear the term ETL when it's related to analytics, analysis, data warehousing specifically. ETL stands for extract, transform, and load. What does extract mean? Extract essentially is letting you extract all of that information, so data, metadata, et cetera, from your multiple systems. So it could be information that's stored in your PPM systems, your ERP systems, your HR systems, et cetera. So it's pulling information and data from all different places. So that's what the extract component does. Transform. So what, if you want to make sense of that data, you need to put it in a way that will make sense to run reports off of it, build analysis off of it, et cetera. And that part is the transformation that has to occur when you want to put it into a data warehouse. Essentially, the transformation is an important aspect of it, because as the data is growing and growing and growing, you want the processing power to be there as well. So you need to structure the data in certain ways so it doesn't take too long to look up information that you need. And loading the information essentially is taking all these multiple data sources, transforming the data, and loading it into a single giant data warehouse, if you want to call it. Again, there's data marts and all that stuff too, but we're just using the term data warehouse loosely here. So it's ETL is a huge component of being able to merge all of your data into a single repository so it makes sense to you when you go to run your reports, your analysis, and so forth. Data warehouse. What is the data warehouse? It's a very, very, very large database. It has collection of data from one or more sources, so the extract part of it brought information from one or more sources. It's data structured for analysis, and we're going to talk about that in the next slide. And data warehouses generally it contains historical information. So if you want to look at data, how your project was performing a month ago versus now, you can do comparisons. You can also track information where you can predict as to where it's going. Maybe I need to make a change now before it's too late. Maybe I want, this is a positive direction we're going. We want to put more resources towards it, et cetera. So any type of action you want to take, you really want to understand how it's been going and where you want to go. So obviously we want to all be, meet within the schedule, and we also want to be under budget. So we want to make sure that all of the information, all of the actions we're taking on a day-to-day basis gets us to our final goal. So we're talking about data warehouse. So we talked about the data being stored in a format where it's easy for doing analysis. Terms you might hear is a cube. You might hear star, you might hear snowflake, etc. All of this essentially is looking at a multi-dimensional spreadsheet. So Excel spreadsheet has rows and columns. So now to start adding other axes to that information, that's really what the data warehouse cubes or star schemas really put that information together. So a fact is one piece of information that is factual in nature. A dimension might be the ways you look at that particular fact. So a fact might be the actual cost of a particular activity to be completed. So that's the actual cost. But now do I want to look at it based on time? Where, how was it performing a week ago, today, tomorrow? You want to look at it, right, maybe location, like where is the actual cost coming in from which projects are located where. You want to look at it by projects per se. You want to look at it by activities, etc. It's just different ways to slice and dice that particular information. And I think I just went into my next slide. There it is. And then going into dimensions. Dimensions is really the way you want to look at that fact. What a data warehouse does is kind of combines all of this information and it pre-stores it for you in your data warehouse cubes. So when you run a report or a SQL statement or a query against that data warehouse, it knows exactly where to go and get that data. It doesn't have to do all the processing that a normal system would do to get that information. And this is very useful because data warehouses are so large. You want to be able to get to the data quick. You can't afford to sit there for 5 minutes while a report is refreshing just because you changed the way you wanted to look at that point of data. A report. We all talked about reports. We probably use it daily. I just recently got a Fitbit, which I was telling these guys, it sends me a weekly report on how I've been performing, how many steps I took, and how many miles I walked or ran or whatever. So in the project management world, you always have project status reports. You probably build it in Excel today. And what happens when you send it off to somebody to take a look at it via email? It's the next day, the data's already changed. There's your report, but it's not really valid anymore. So is it really worth taking all that time that you just spent to build it together? You might have a report that pulls up all the milestones where you are in meeting your targets. There might be reports that look at your activities, the predecessor activities, the successor activities. If one is running late, how is that going to affect everything else? You might want to look at all of the activities starting the next week, so you're not, you're prepared for what's coming instead of just waiting till it happens and then being like, oh, it's late, this one's late, that one's not started, etc. So you want to be able to stay on top of things. So we do a lot of these types of operational style reports. When we're talking about analytics, another term that comes into play is dashboards. And dashboard, just like in your car, it has all of the gadgets on your single view, right? You can turn on the volume, you can turn on the radio, you can have your steering wheel, you can do GPS, you can control the heat, the AC, etc. I'm from Chicago, so we have to control the heat a lot. But so right now, a dashboard from the perspective of business analysis, you want to have a personalized view of what is relevant to you. So as an executive, you might have certain KPIs that you're tracking, and you want to know at a single glance when you log into your computer in the morning exactly where the projects that are, the key ones for you, where is it? How is it meeting against the objectives of the organization? You might want to have an alert. This project is running late. This project, or like this project is running late. Why? And you want to be able to look at that. There's reports, graphs, charts. Again, it's like a news page for you, personalized for you. Drill down. So what are you going to do when you have a dashboard and it tells you, oh, bing, 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 this project is behind schedule or behind budget? What are you going to do about it? If you just look at it, then that's about it, right? So you want to be able to actually analyze that data. So you want to be able to click on that project and see what's causing the delay. Where is the over allocation? Where is my cost, overruns, etc. So this example that I use is just project X is behind schedule. You click on the project name, you can see all of the activities that are associated to that project, perhaps for that week, whatever it may be, and see which activity is causing that delay. And then you can click on the activity and be able to see why is it causing that delay. And then you can even drill down further and make that change in your system as to maybe this resource is over allocated and so they can't really finish the work on time. So maybe you need to change the resource or add or change the schedule a little bit, et cetera. So you can do those types of analysis and be proactive in essentially, handling your business and your projects. You want to do analysis. So you want this to be very analytical in nature. So analyzing the data by asking different questions. Which projects are behind schedule? Again, we've kind of talked about the same thing here. Will this project go over budget? Will I still meet my target dates? So essentially, these are the key important factors. You want to be able to have the right tool set and the right information to be able to answer these types of questions. Ad hoc is another term that we hear a lot. What does that really mean? Ad hoc is something that is on the fly, unplanned. If I want to see some information, I can just go and click the fields that I want to see the information on, and boom, there's the report, there's my chart. I can look at the data, take some action against it. In general, if you don't have an analytics solution, the process is probably either Excel, dump out the data into Excel, but now if you have multiple data sources, you got to bring in data from multiple sources, put it together. Perhaps you'll send a request to IT, and IT will build that report for you. That might be a bottleneck in terms of how long that takes and what's the priority and what's not. So it's really ad hoc is very hand in hand with, for example, you want to have it be much more self-service in nature. Any questions? I'm going to pause right here. There's no quiz. All right. So some of the standard business intelligence components. So what a business intelligence or business analytics environment solution would have is, the first one is the ETL. So when we're talking about pulling in information from multiple data sources, we want to be able to do it quick and fast. So we have adapters and so forth that are available that is built specifically for pulling data from ERP systems or pulling data from your HR systems, your PPM systems, and so forth. And then there's the data warehouse. So this is just kind of a graphical view of the star schema, the fact, and then having the dimensions. So most analytic systems will have this already pre-built for you. So the data is defined, the metadata is defined, the connections are defined. All you'll need to do is go in and configure it to meet your requirements. And then the last part of the solution would be having a library of reports or dashboards that are pre-built, and an individual can just click and add those reports or dashboards for them on their particular page. So when they log in, they only see the information that they care about, and they don't see a bunch of other junk that's on the screen for everybody else that might need it for their jobs. Any questions? All right, what is business analytics? So business intelligence was just trying to make sense of your voluminous data. Business analytics kind of takes it a little bit further. So business analytics focuses on developing new insights and understanding of business performance based on data and statistical methods. So essentially, analytics takes it beyond just BI, and it's putting in, being able to identify algorithms, being able to put in calculations, look at the data in different ways to see where it's going, where it's been, how it's doing, etc. Why is this important? So why would you want to use business analytics? So business analytics can help you answer questions like, why is this happening? What if these trends continue? What will happen next? So doing predictive analysis. What is the best that can happen? So how can you optimize your particular step that you're in? Business analytics also helps you address today's challenges. And these challenges we've kind of put together based on our knowledge with customers that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And it's actually funny because it doesn't change whether it's a public sector customer or a private sector customer. It's all the same challenges. Essentially inconsistencies. So data is stored in multiple different places. Data is not always consistent with each other. There's no single source of truth, so to speak. outdated information. So as I mentioned, you create an Excel report, you send it to somebody over email, or you save it for yourself. When you go back in like 3 days later, the information's already stale and inconsistent. It's not even relevant anymore. All of this is very time consuming, so you're repeating the same process. We find that people that build certain types of reports, they probably spend about 4 to 5 days every 2 weeks building out a report that gets sent out. Again, every 2 weeks they do the same process. Lack of self-service. So you probably get a ton of requests that might just be a tweaking of a look and feel of a report. It might just be tweaking a couple fields, etc. If there's no self-service involved, then all of the business users who are not technical enough to pull the data out and do what they need to do send their request to IT to do all of that, which is probably a good chunk of it, I would say. So it has that reliance on the IT group. And then the inability to make informed decisions, because you really are just making decisions on the fly. You really don't have concrete information in a single place to kind of see, how all of these pieces fit together and where you want to, and look at it against where you want to go. How do you make those decisions to take you to where you need to be? Where is your single source of truth? So it's just an example. Every organization has the same challenges here. Tons of different data sources. You have project management data sources, HR, budget, ERP systems, etc. Tons of different data sources, tons of different BI tools that you might be using, whether it's Crystal Reports, Cognos, Business Objects, Oracle's BI tools as well. And then from a front-end reporting perspective, you might have a web page that has all the information. So when you log into your web page, you think, hey, that's great, I can see all of the information that I need, but really it's only bringing information from one system. It's bringing in information from your project management system. Or if you go into Excel, you're pulling information maybe from a couple different data sources that you dumped into a spreadsheet, and now you're building it out and emailing it to people. Again, Microsoft Access as being like the data warehouse. Not really. Kind of going in that aspect. So the whole point of this slide is that you really want all of the data sources to kind of talk, from an end user perspective, you want all of your information to be consolidated. You want information no matter what you use, whether it's Excel or your web page or a PowerPoint or a different BI tool as a front end perspective. You want all of that right information to be given to you in the right format. So that's really kind of where we're all striving to be from a BI and analytics perspective. How we get there is the challenge. So one thing we want to highlight here is that it's really business analytics, business intelligence. The solution itself is really a partnership. It's a partnership between the line of business folks and then IT. One cannot live without the other. They're both reliant on each other. It's really a true partnership, especially if you want to increase your business value from the line of business perspective, and then you also want to drive down costs. And that we can get into in a little bit later as well. And all of this information, you want to be able to provide it quickly. You want to be able to provide it in many different formats, whether it's paper printed, reports printed on paper, whether it's posted on a web page, whether it's on your mobile device or your iPad when you're traveling by train or whatever, and you can just view all of that information right on there. How do you go about achieving this? So how do people really use business intelligence or business analytics kind of today? Big thing is reports, operational type of reports that are static in nature, that are maybe run on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis. Other things, emails, probably send each other emails about status of things, right? You say you might have dashboards. Again, I know almost every product probably has a dashboard, so you have multiple dashboards for each different product, but are they all looking at the same information? It might just be conversations you're having in the lunchroom or in the kitchen when you go to grab something, right? So it's really business intelligence. There's no one solution to it, and we do it every day, but in different ways. And Excel spreadsheets you brought up, that's probably the most common way that we find customers are utilizing or making sense of the data. These are all just different ways. Again, one is not right or wrong. It's just a matter of being able to apply all of the information that you want to make business decisions. That comes down to, we talked about all of the different pieces of data warehousing before, the terminologies, et cetera. So that's just a little tiny subset of data warehousing. If you go to buy a book on data warehousing, you'll probably see that there's so many different areas to consider when you're building it. So essentially, building versus buying. And I think we talked about this in our previous session. You guys mostly buy solutions and then kind of work with the vendor to perfect it or implement it. So essentially, it's a matter of getting a bag of Legos and trying to build a city out of it, which means you are building it, you're supporting it. If the person that designed the data warehouse leaves, what do? And most data warehouse projects, as our keynote speaker this morning mentioned, or most large projects, he said, applies to data warehouses, because it is a large project to implement a data warehouse. And if you have, most of them fail within the design phase, and about 80% of all data warehouse projects never come to fruition. So that's a huge number. That's a lot of effort. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of cost. So the best solution that we find, and how our customers are implementing it, is by buying a pre-built solution. So buying a pre-built analytics solution that applies to your business, that applies to you, and what is important to your organization. And those business analytics solutions have so many plugins that you just have to configure what you need, because it might not apply to you. All pieces might not apply to you. And the nice thing about it is vendor supported. So it's not like your DBA leaves or the designer leaves. Now you don't know what happened, how the data was structured, et cetera. The vendor is the one supporting it, so you could always call the vendor. The vendor handles all of your upgrades, your development, the QA, et cetera, for that product. You are not managing all of that in-house. You can really use your time efficiently to do other things that are more important to you than trying to figure out how the data warehouse was designed behind the scenes. Where do you want business intelligence analytics to be available? One of the key areas is we're on the go all the time. We're always multitasking these days. We want to be able to do what we need to do to get the job done. And that might involve mobile capabilities. You want to be able to have a analytics solution that can be provided for you, with whether it's on your handheld devices, iPhones, iPads, printed paper, et cetera. So you want to be able to really kind of take business intelligence on the go and do what you need to do no matter where you are. Make decisions. It goes down to who really uses this and who really needs to make all these decisions. So from a engineering analyst perspective, there might be a single view of the upcoming workload. There's indicators, there's monitoring. So different roles, different users use different components of the solution. A manager might want to actually do more of the drill down analysis because they want to understand what the root cause of a problem is. They want to be able to correct that problem proactively versus reactively. The executive wants to, at a single glance, be able to view how the business is doing, how their organization is doing. They don't need to go chase 5 people down to get the information to make a decision. They want to know in a single view what is relevant to them and how it's performing. And another area here is who can use business intelligence. It's pretty much across the board. Everybody in every organization at whatever level they are will use business intelligence. Whether it's from the financial side, human resources, projects, procurement, case management, service and contract, wherever it is. Everybody in every department, every level will use business intelligence in one way or another. This slide again kind of highlights the areas that are important from an infrastructure perspective. All business analytics solutions have a common enterprise data model. And if you had to design this yourself, you would need to define all of the sources that you get your data from. Then you have to define all of the business models as to how these data points relate to each other. So you have to create those star schemas, those snowflake schemas, all of that. You have to define what is fact, what is dimensions, and how you want to look at it. And then finally, what you want to be able to do is provide a presentation to the users. What that really means is, as an end user, you want to be able to just click and drag fields that are important to you to analyze. You don't want to be sitting there saying, oh, this is coming from my ERP system, and this is coming from my Oracle database, this is coming from my Excel spreadsheet. You want to just say, I want to see the actual cost. You just pull the actual cost over. I want to see, you know, the locations of my projects. You just pull the location field over. So that is what we call the presentation layer. So from an analytics solution perspective, what you see in the back end, in the data warehouse piece of it, is exactly what you see in the front end of the tool, where it's one-to-one. So that circled area is the presentation layer, and this is the actual presentation that you see in the application itself. Any questions? You guys have any questions, comments?
Has that been helpful? Is this good? Is this educating some people on how? That's our goal today, to try to talk education and inform you. So any questions are certainly encouraged.
No
You know,
comment, Charles? There.
What's that?
Is it no comment?
Oh, I always have a comment. Go ahead.
You mentioned trends that the analytics can predict
Mm-hmm.
things, and so I've been trying to think, because we've started an analytics project in our department. I've been trying to think outside the box on how analytics really can work, and I do a lot of grocery shopping and have a card that I slot
Mhm.
through there for points for the school or whatever program they have. But nevertheless, that information is attached to me.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
when I do my Thanksgiving shopping at Rayleigh's or whatever store you go to, that information is stored when you use your card. I think about Rayleigh's and how they would use it.
Mm-hmm.
So next Thanksgiving, they can kind of predict what Troy's going to buy,
Mm-hmm.
especially 3-4 years in a row.
Mm-hmm.
They've got some pretty sound things, and they could even send me coupons
Mm-hmm.
geared
Specific to those
towards the products that they know that to buy. Maybe they want me to switch
Brands.
breadcrumbs or whatever.
I would
They send me
think that
another
they would
coupon.
send you coupons for the things you don't usually buy,
Yeah, they
and charge you full price for the things they know you buy.
But, I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about business intelligence, is that there's a lot of data that we don't, maybe not really think about, but we start thinking about predicting things and
Mhm.
trends. That metadata from that card swipe and all that stuff is all used to help.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of grocery stores, one of the examples for data mining we used to talk about was they always put the beer next to the diapers, because the mom always calls the dad coming back, or the dad, mom, whatever. One person calls the other person and says, hey, can you pick up some diapers? I used the last one. And inevitably they want, it's a long day of work. They go into the grocery store and the beer is next to the diapers, because then they can grab the beer along with the diapers to go back home. So that's another example that they always use. We see it on Amazon too. You go on, they always tell you recommendations, right? Based on what your search criteria was. Forget about what you bought, but like what your search criteria was. Kind of the other scary thing is on my iPhone, or Facebook, for example, it posts things that you might have bought using a different site, but somehow they link it to what you might have bought. So like the posts that you see on there are based on your analytics. So it's really analyzing all the activity. Nothing is secret anymore.
That relates to IT and projects. When you start to do projects that are similar, it can say these last 5 projects that were of a similar size, of a similar type, this is how you did. Your plan today is off compared to what we've seen in the past. You might need to tweak X, Y, and Z. Those are kind of things where analytics from an IT, from a PMO perspective, can come into play too. Exactly that trending and past information.
And that's not possible if you're not storing all of that information, history particularly. Any other questions or comments?